Hi, welcome to class number 2 of the row sampler. So this is class number 2 of a series of 14. So last week we talked about putting a kit together and getting your fabrics together. So hopefully you've maybe already done that. And I just want to review that just for one little second. And I just want to say that, like, if this were the kit that you were going to choose, if you wanted to do something that were blues and purples, there's just 12 half-yard cuts that you need to complete the quilt. You then have to come up with a background, so you need 4 yards of background, something that's complementary to those. But I really want to talk for just a second about sashing color. Sashing is super important because what will happen is it will fully change the color of your quilt. So I want to show you, if you put a purple with this quilt truly becomes a purple quilt. If you put blue as your sashing, it looks totally different. It becomes a blue quilt. Those are the things that you see are those bright blues that are coming out of here. Your other option is, of course, just to do something that's a little bit more subtle. So this one is primarily black. It has just little bits of almost a periwinkle color to it. So again, totally different look. You do have a little bit of time. If you're not particularly happy with the sashing you've picked out, or you feel like it's not the right thing, you have a little bit of time, because what we're doing in the 14-week series is we're doing a different one of these border pieces each week. The last week, the 14th week, is when we're putting the whole thing together, and that's when you will have to have made your decision about your sashing. And what your sashing is going to do is just going to separate everything. You're also going to have an outer border for it, or an outer sash. And so you have a little bit of time. So if you're putting your rows together and you are wishing that it was a little more purple or a little more blue or a little less pink or whatever, you have some options to actually literally change the color of your quilt, like I just demonstrated. All right, on to class number 1. So class number 1, we're going to do the migrating geese. It's shown up here in the corner. And here's another example of it. And one thing that I want to mention is that as we do these rows, they might end up the exact size that I tell you on the pattern, and they might be a little bit different. Don't do anything. Don't trim it up. Don't add a little border. Don't do anything until the very end. The very end, I'm going to show you how to make sure that everything fits, so you don't have to make any strange little decisions. So your pattern, you do have to have your printed pattern for this. So you've either received a printed copy from me perhaps, or you can download one. Again, our website is www.fabricpatch.net. The other thing is that for each of these rows, you can turn it into a quilt. So stay at the very end. We're going to have some show and tell, and I'll show you 2 examples of this as a full quilt. There is a pattern for it that has this whole technique and the quilt, and it's called On the Fly, and it's on our website also, and I'll show you these quilts. Okay, for those of you guys that are expert quilters or a little bit more advanced, you probably don't need to go through all of this. We can go on to the sewing part. But for the rest of you, I thought I would talk for just a second about selecting your fabrics and cutting your fabrics and the appropriate use of a ruler and a rotary cutter. So you probably have your bin of fabric that you've put together, and I don't know if I have one of those in here. If you have a bin of, oh, here it is. If you have a bin of fabric, my suggestion is just to find these little silica gel packs. You can find them in your shoe boxes. You can find them in everything. Just save these and throw these in there with your fabric. It helps to keep everything kind of fresh, because if you're working on something sporadically, you might have this box sealed up and it'll smell, you know, like grandma's button box, so you don't want that. So anyway, go through your fabrics and don't spend too much time on this. This always seems to be the hardest thing, is somebody deciding which 3 fabrics do I need. What's going to happen is this is the row that you're making. And you only need 3 goose fabrics, and then you need your background fabric. So each one you're going to see the goose 4 times. If you feel like you want something a little bit more sporadic, you can make more of them. But technically all you need is just choose 3 fabrics and your background, and then put that aside. All right, so let's talk about cutting. So when we talk about cutting, of course you have your mat, some sort of surface that you can cut on that's not going to mar everything up. You have your ruler, and of course I like a non-slip ruler that's not going to slide while I'm cutting. And of course your rotary cutter, whatever brand you're using. You just want to know how to use your ruler, how to use your rotary cutter, how to open it, close it, and to be careful. You want to always be in the habit of closing your rotary cutter when you're not using it. If you leave this open and you walk away, I'm going to tell you, you're going to get cut. All of the scars that I have on my hand are from rotary cutters, and they're from people who've left it open. Because even if all you're doing is just smoothing fabric or whatever, you'll bump right into it, and it is a razor blade. So be real careful with this. I also have a serious wound, well, not wound, but scar from dropping it on my foot. So anyway, be real careful with those so that you know how those work. The other thing is that when you're cutting, make sure that you are keeping it straight up and down when you cut. Don't tip it when you're cutting. If you feel like you want to see everything and you're tipping it this way, a couple of things are going to happen. One thing is you are going to shave off the whole side of your ruler, and your ruler is no longer going to be straight and true. The other thing is you're actually going to cut out nicks out of your mat. And so you want to make sure that you are straight up and down. So when I make my first cut here, I'm going to line everything up on my ruler. Oh, here, let me just go back. So here's my 1/2 yard of fabric. And if it's super wrinkly because it's been in the box, go ahead and just give it a good press, and just fold it. So I've got my edge here. I'm just going to fold it over. If you have a longer ruler that you're using, you might not have to fold it a second time, but I've decided for this one to use my smaller one. So I've got my fabric folded, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself a nice straight edge. So I'm laying this down. I have everything nice and lined up. And then again, here's my rotary cutter. And for mine, all I do is I just tap it and it opens. And then again, I'm holding this, see, straight up and down, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to saw it. So let's just cut again just for a second. You don't want to cut up and back and start doing stuff like that. You just want to make one nice cut. See, and even doing that, isn't it funny that it didn't really cut properly? Just put down firm pressure, start right here, and make one movement. The other thing that I do is I don't move my ruler until I've made sure that I cut all the way through. Every once in a while, I'll find that my blade needs to be changed. And the thing is that if you find that you're not cutting all the way through, change your blade. Blades are inexpensive. Just change it. It's no big deal. If you don't have a full metal one like this, if you have one of the plastic ones, I think I showed that in the first video. If you keep using a dull blade, you will not only have to replace your $6 blade, you'll have to replace your $20 rotary cutter. So be sure and keep a nice clean blade on there. So once you've cut your nice straight edge, what you're going to do, since I have a nice straight edge, I'm just going to flip this around. And when I flip this around, that way I can go ahead and measure using my ruler to measure. So I'm going to lay this down. So let's say that what I have to cut is a 2-inch strip. That's not what you're cutting for this, but I just want to say that. All right, so here's my 2 inches. In fact, let's cut a 2.5-inch strip because I can use that. So I'm 1, 2, and see where my half mark is? It's right there. And I'm going to line that up. And you always just double check before you go to cut one last time. 1, 2 1/2. I'm lined up right there. And the reason that I like to measure with my ruler, not on my mat, is because this is holding everything nice and square, and I can see from the top of my piece to the bottom of my piece that I have it exactly where it's supposed to go. So again, one nice firm movement, and I have this nice perfect 2.5-inch strip. Let's say that what you have to cut is something that's like, I don't know, 5 3/8, some sort of a strange measurement. People get all freaked out about the 3/8 or 5/8 inch measurements. Well, let's just look at our ruler for a second. So you can see that here's our 1 inch, here's our half, which is easily recognizable, and see our quarters. Our quarters, we've got some pretty big marks in there, and then there's our tiny little 1/8. So it's not that it's difficult to use, it's just that, you know, on this particular ruler, there's incremental sizes there. So let's say that we're doing something that's 3/8. There's one, let's say we're going to do 3 3/8. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3/8. So on that tiny little line right there, so I've got the tiny little line right there, and if you come all the way down, you can see that that 3/8 inch line is all the way on it. I'm straight across the top here, straight across the bottom there. Here's my 1, 2, and then just before I cut, I'm going to check again. 1, 2, 3, and 3/8 all the way down. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that. Let's say we're doing 6 5/8. No, let's say we're doing 4 5/8. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/8. There it is, it's no big deal. It's right on that little line right there. It's the 5th one over. It's really no different as you're lining it up on that line than if you're doing 5 1/2. Doesn't make any difference at all. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut my strip. And again, refer to your pattern so you know exactly the size that you're cutting. Okay, here's our strip. Now we're going to turn our strip into a square. So what we're going to do is, again, we've got this salvage here, and you might do a couple of options. You might decide to come over here and cut this salvage off. I tend not to. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut it bigger. I know the size of this square that I'm going to cut, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this, and then I'm going to turn this around, and again, lining this up on my line. So this particular square was 4 5/8. And so if we look here, we're 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5/8 right there along the bottom. And we're 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to scooch this over. 4 5/8 right there. So I've got everything is lined up right as it should be. The only thing I have left to cut is this one right over here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut my other squares, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so what we've cut is we have 6 background blocks and we have 3 goose blocks. And again, the goose blocks, that's what your color is going to be. And then you have all of your background blocks. And again, refer to your pattern to make sure you have the right size. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your goose block and you're going to cut this in half on the diagonal. So the easiest way to do that really is just to go ahead and line up on that point and line up on this point. If you want to go ahead and line up your 45-degree angle there just to make sure, you can go ahead and do that. Make sure you give yourself enough room here where you're cutting. Okay, and then same thing, we're just going to put our pressure. We're going to cut that in half. We're going to do that with all 3 of our goose blocks. Okay, so all 3 of them are cut in half on the diagonal. Now we have 6 triangles and 6 background blocks. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this background block and you're going to put it on top, right sides together, whoops, right sides together, your triangle right on top of your background. And see how that hangs over? That's not wrong. That's going to kind of freak you out a little bit, but that's exactly right. Because then now what's going to happen is I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch all the way down here and all the way across here. And I'm going to do that on every one of them. Here's my background block. I'm going to line that up right sides together. I'm lining up the corner. And I'm going to sew 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. Do the next one. And I'm going to do that for all 6 of them. I'm going to go to the sewing machine and then I'll be right back. Okay, here's all of our blocks that we've sewn. So all we're going to do is take these and from point to point, put my glasses on. Cut these in half on the diagonal. We're going to do that with all 6 of them. Okay, here's all 12. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the ironing board and we're going to press them all open. So we set the seam. We use a heavy iron just to make sure that that seam is open all the way. I tend not to use a steam iron just because I feel like when you add moisture and heat, you can easily distort a seam in a piece of fabric. Okay, so again, here we have our right and our left ones. You might find that you have these weird little dog ears on here, and if you do, just take your scissors and just nip those off. Otherwise, they're going to kind of get in your way a little bit later. So we just trim those off. Nothing fussy about them. So then what you can do is you can go ahead and kind of lay out your goose units the way that you are going to like it, and what's going to happen is they're all going to go up like this. So you'll end up with 12 geese. And so lay those out the way that you like, and then what will happen to start is you have to start down here. And this is called an inset seam, where you start kind of in a different spot to get a nice straight edge. So you're going to lay this over on top of each other, and then again, your 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're going to sew that. Once you've done that, it's time to press it open. So I've done one right here, and then again, here's another one of those weird little dog legs. I'm just going to cut that off. And once I cut that off, I have my nice straight edge right here. So I'm going to put my next one on and do the same thing. I'm just going to lay that down, and it's going to fit just perfectly. This tip comes right up to the tip right there. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine. And you can pin if you want to pin. You can press if you want to press. Let's just go over to the sewing machine together for a second. I don't, and find my little foot here. And again, the 1/4 inch seam allowance is important, just to make sure that your math comes out right. And I happen to know where 1/4 inch is on this foot. My thread's in the way there. Okay, and then I'm going to come back and press it. Do the same thing. So again, it looks like this. So, and you can set the seam first. And then again, that's why I like a nice heavy iron. I'm just going to get in there and open that seam up. And then, all right. Okay, so this one's there. Then my next one is now I need another right. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to line that up just like before. Line that up like that. Sew my 1/4 inch. Press that open. Go to my next one. Line that up onto the point here. Sew my 1/4 inch. Press that open. So then what happens is you get done and you have this weird little piece left over. So you take, and it talks about that your very last step is to cut a square, and you cut your square in half on the diagonal, because then you've got one that fits here and then this strange one that fits here. So we sewed this one on. And the other thing too that I just want to point out are these little tails. These little tails are important, just like in the other step, just to make sure that we have something to trim off. So we've done that one. We're going to do one more pressing job right here. So we've pressed again, and then we're just going to press this seam open. And then what happens is you have this funny looking top that, once again, everything looks like we've done it wrong, but we haven't. And so what's extremely important are these 1/4 inch seam allowance things. So as long as you have 1/4 inch, that's why we end up with a point where we end up with a point, and we want the same thing over here. We want this 1/4 inch to the edge here, so that when we sew this together, we end up having a nice straight edge. So I'm gonna come over here, line this up, and see what I've lined up on my ruler is I have this right here. This is right along this edge here, and I'm just going to cut that off. And then I have that nice straight edge, so I have something to line up. I'm going to come down here. And so see, that's lined up there. I'm going to cut off the top. And then I'm going to come down this far side and do the same thing. So I've got my straight edge right here. See it right there? And then, oh, that's weird. Oh, I'm going to make, okay, that's not straight. I'm going to make my goose straight. So let's go back. So I've got my goose straight. Okay, there we go. So my goose is straight. Now I'm going to trim off that top. Okay, so this little extra that you have here, leave this for right now. If you're doing something different with your geese and you want to make a border, you want to do whatever, you'll just kind of keep going, and then what'll happen is this just gives you just that little bit of wiggle room as to how much you're going to need to make sure that something fits in there. Same thing down here. What you can do when you're down at the bottom, now there's only 3 geese in this, and of course in yours you're going to have 12, but I could cut this off right here. I could also come back in and add a little piece in there to give myself a little more length, which is going to help to make sure that my goose will fit where it's supposed to go. So for this particular piece, when I am going to put this one all together, after you've measured everything, so depending upon which rows you want to put in there, and again, we're going to talk about this in the very last class, when you've decided which ones are going here, that's when you decide the length of this. So you'll either cut off that edge just a little bit, or if you can see on mine, I actually shaved off about 1/4 of an inch on the bottom of that one, and you can decide, are you going to stop right up at the top of your goose, or in this one you can see I had a little bit of extra that I needed. So what's really nice about this is that for your finished quilt, we just call this that little bit of insurance, and so that way we know that this panel is going to fit in there properly. So once you've done this panel, just go ahead and leave it this way, fold it up, put it in your bin, and you're ready to go. We'll trim everything off when we go to put everything together at our 14th class. The other thing that I want to mention is that in the on the fly pattern on this, it also gives you the math for the smaller ones. So you can also do tiny little geese. So if you want to do small migrating geese for a border, if you want to do it for the edge of a placemat, if you want to do for something else, then you have a couple different sizes that you can do. And then I'm just going to show you a couple of other options. This is the on the fly quilt. And this one, if you do your geese going horizontally, it can look like fish. And so you can have them going opposite directions. And what's nice about this quilt is that you make your goose panels first, or in this case, migrating fish panels, and whatever size this ends up, that's what determines the rest of your fabric there. Or this one, if you have some fabric that you really like and you just think that it's pretty fabric and you want to show off that fabric, you can do the same thing. Choose just a really cool focus fabric, some sort of a complementary contrasting sashing fabric, make all of your geese in there, and again, they just show each other off. So this is the on the fly pattern, which is the exact same technique that we've done, and you can do this whole thing as a quilt instead of just a border. So all right, I hope that all makes sense. I hope that it makes sense, and you can go ahead and get your migrating geese panel done, and maybe if you liked doing it, you can put a few more together for a quick little panel quilt. If you have any questions, be sure and email us. Otherwise, I'll see you in a week.